obtained by GBNews, which poses serious questions about the real conversations about race that some public figures are having in private. Nick Timothy, the former advisor to Theresa May, will be with me. As Joe Biden confuses Iran with Ukraine, we ask if he's really the man the free world wants at the helm right now. Seb Gorka, ex of the Trump White House, will join us. And are passengers in London right to be angry when tube drivers go on strike while taking home an average salary of £56,000, much more in some instances with overtime? We may have found someone willing to justify that pay packet. And alongside me throughout the next 2 hours, free market enthusiast Annabelle Denham. But first, the headlines with Miranda.
Thank you, Colin. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 4. The top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has told the Commons Russia's actions in Ukraine fully qualify as a war crime. Ahead of Prime Minister's questions, Ukraine's ambassador to the UK, who was watching proceedings, was welcomed with a standing ovation. Well, Boris Johnson praised Ukrainian citizens for their resolve. He announced the government will match up to £20 million in public donations to the Disaster Emergency Committee's Ukraine appeal. He also said he told President Volodymyr Zelensky the UK will do everything it can to accelerate the delivery of weapons.
Putin has gravely miscalculated. In his abhorrent assault on a sovereign nation, he has underestimated the extraordinary fortitude of the Ukrainian people and the unity and resolve of the free world in standing up to his barbarism. The UN General Assembly will vote later today, and we call on every nation to join us in condemning Russia and demanding that Putin turn his tanks around.
Well, in Ukraine, the State Emergency Service says more than 2,000 civilians have been killed since the start of the Russian invasion. Hundreds of structures, including transport facilities, hospitals, kindergartens and homes, have also been destroyed. The World Health Organization says Ukrainians may face imminent shortages of cancer medicines and insulin. This morning, President Volodymyr Zelensky said resistance has been strong and that Russia had lost almost 6,000 servicemen in Ukraine.
Just think about this figure. 6,000. To receive what? To receive Ukraine? It is impossible. It will not happen with rockets. It will not happen with bombs, tanks, any strikes. We are on our land, and there will be an international tribunal to prosecute them for the war against us.
Thousands of Ukrainians have said they'll stay and fight to defend their country, including MP Kira Rudik.
We have enough of stuff and we are getting more and more supplies to be able to survive the siege. We understand that Putin has nothing that could stop him except for the bravery of Ukrainian people and the support of our international partners.
Well, a Kiev resident told GB News of the Ukrainians' bravery during the continued shelling of the city.
Many people in Ukraine they are strong, they are not frightened, and they are ready to fight till the end, till the last drop of blood, if it will be needed.
Well, meanwhile, the humanitarian crisis is also growing. The UN's Refugee Agency says more than 874,000 people have now fled Ukraine to neighbouring countries since the conflict began. Poland has taken in almost 500,000 refugees. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer called for the owner of Chelsea Football Club, Roman Abramovich, to face sanctions, saying now is the time to sanction every oligarch.
He's a person of interest to the Home Office because of his links to the Russian state and his public association with corrupt activity and practices. Last week, the Prime Minister said that Abramovich is facing sanctions. He later corrected the record to say that he isn't. Well, why on earth isn't he?
Mr. Speaker, it's not appropriate for me to comment on individual cases at this stage.
The owner of the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, which runs between Russia and Germany, has sacked all of its staff following US sanctions. The company, which is based in Switzerland, says it hasn't filed for bankruptcy yet, but Reuters sources suggest it could happen as soon as this week. Germany refused to grant the pipeline final approval after the Russian incursion. Well, in other news, a 15-year-old girl has been seriously injured in a shooting at a bus stop in Liverpool. Reports of gunfire in Toxteth were heard just after 5 p.m. yesterday. The girl was taken to hospital and is in a stable condition. Police say it's a miracle that she survived. Merseyside police say a 21-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder.
The actions of those people responsible for this attack on a 15-year-old schoolgirl who is waiting in a bus stop to go home from school are utterly appalling and shocking, even with 29 years service. It shows a total disregard and contempt that they have for the decent, honest, law-abiding people who live, work and visit this city.
And to Australia now, where tens of thousands of people have fled their homes following warnings of extreme weather. 14 people have died since the worst floods on record hit both Queensland and New South Wales. Brisbane received 80% of its average annual rainfall in just a few days. Sydney is now bracing for torrential rain and flash floods. Well, you're up to date. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Brazier.
Now, in 2014, a letter was sent to the council in Birmingham. Its contents sparked outrage. It alleged that several schools in the city had been taken over by hardline Islamists. It became known as the Trojan Horse Affair, a campaign to infiltrate institutions paid for by the British taxpayer, overseen by local government, but unknown to either of them, repurposed to reflect a really hardline Salafist worldview. Well, Nick Timothy grew up in Birmingham. He came to national prominence as Theresa May's Chief of Staff when she was Prime Minister. And he's written about the Trojan Horse scandal and, like many, has been alarmed at subsequent attempts to depict the investigation, the official government investigation into what happened in Birmingham, as an anti-Muslim witch hunt. Nick Timothy joins me now. Nick, welcome to you. An anti-Muslim witch hunt. I mean, this was a major government investigation which found that at 5 separate schools this type of infiltration had happened. Who and how is this story being rewritten?
Well, there is a clear attempt to rewrite what happened in the Trojan Horse affair. The facts are actually made clear by a series of official inquiries run by the government through a former police officer called Peter Clark from Ofsted, and from a school leader commissioned by Birmingham Council by the name of Ian Kershaw. All of those inquiries found that there was a sustained attempt to change the nature and the ethos of these schools outside proper processes, breaking all sorts of rules. And in Peter Clark's words, the ethos that people were trying to establish in the schools reflected hardline interpretation of Sunni Islam. And,
I mean, Peter Clark, given his reputation, given the type of investigation we would have expected him to mount, it would be hard to gainsay that, but it has been.
Yes, it has. There's been an attempt over a period of years by a number of activist groups, in particular an organisation called MEND, to claim that actually there was no plot. There was, in fact, a plot by the media and the government to claim that in the name of Islamophobia, the government and the media exaggerated what had happened in the schools. It was all perfectly legitimate and quite appropriate for the governors to impose this discipline on the schools. And far from far from being a plot that the public should be concerned about, the plot was actually engaged by ministers to denigrate Muslims and to justify anti-Muslim policies, and nothing could be further from the truth, as these successive inquiries have found.
Nick, could I just crave your patience just to hang on there in front of the camera for 2 or 3 minutes? I want to expand out this story a little bit. As you'd expect, the Trojan horse affair left its mark on politics more generally in Birmingham. My GB News colleague Tom Harwood has obtained a recording which does suggest controversial views about Islamism and indeed race relations are not far from the surface in the city. There are some legal niceties we need to observe, and for that reason I want to play Tom's monologue from earlier today to you now in full.
The people of Birmingham Erdington vote for a new MP on Thursday in a poll following the sudden death of respected Labour MP Jack Dromey. The frontrunner among the 12 candidates to replace him is Labour's Paulette Hamilton. Her party has held the seat since 1945. Well, today GB News can reveal we have uncovered some interesting past comments of Hamilton's, which she made in 2015. Speaking at an event entitled "The Ballot or the Bullet? Does Your Vote Count?", Hamilton appeared alongside the controversial race academic Kehinde Andrews and made a number of eyebrow-raising comments about the value of democracy. First, let's turn to the views that appear to suggest she is torn between the democratic system and what she calls an uprising.
So you talk about the bullet or the vote. I'm not sure. Although I believe in the vote and I believe in our right to use that vote or destroy that vote, I'm not sure that we will get what we really deserve in this country using the vote. But I don't know if we are a strong enough group to get what we want to get. If we have an uprising, I think we will be quashed in such a way we could lose a generation of our young people. So I am very torn. I went away and watched the Malcolm X film to make sure, and listened to a lot of what he'd said to make sure I was ready.
Now, Malcolm X was a divisive figure in the American civil rights movement, accused of supporting violence in the otherwise noble cause of racial justice. So that's quite a statement. But perhaps more interesting is what she said a few minutes later at the same panel event. In making a point about political representation, Hamilton made an interesting comparison. A year after the so-called Trojan horse scandal broke, Hamilton also talked about infiltration, of taking over governorships, changing head teachers, and inserting religio-political views into those schools that were taken over. This is what she said.
We had Trojan horse in the council. Our Muslim brothers and sisters, for many, many years, you know, there were things out there saying that they had made a plan about how they were going to try and not integrate, but ensure that their teachings and what have you got into the system. What then happened was many of the schools, inner city schools in Birmingham, certain schools, the Muslim families, they filled the schools. They then ensured that they took over the governorships. As they took over the governorships, they made sure that the heads of those schools were people that they wanted to represent their cause. What they then did with doing all of this, it made sure that their religious views and their beliefs were taken through the education system. It was also then taken into politics. We have large numbers of Muslim councillors. We've got 2 MPs in this city that look after the needs, well, they don't, but they're supposed to look after the needs of a community. What has happened is they've got into positions of power and they've forgotten the reason they were put there in the first place. The problem with our community, we're not even on the map.
Now, later in the discussion, when talking about increasing representation, Hamilton went on to say, quote, "I know that we want something of our own, but sometimes you have to infiltrate other systems if you want to get change." Now, finally, Hamilton discussed the ways in which people can vote. She described how postal votes are used among some ethnic minority communities.
The postal vote is the way some of our ethnic minority communities actually lock it down. Because what they do is old families just have the postal vote. Whoever comes in says vote this one, tick, postal vote goes back, and in one household you can have 8 votes and it's on lockdown.
Now, Hamilton's comments were made in 2015 during a 2-hour panel discussion hosted by the Organisation of Black Unity. A Labour Party spokesman said, Paulette Hamilton is arguing for better representation for the black community in public life, and as she is campaigning to become Birmingham's first black MP, she has a point. Now, on the Trojan horse comments, the Labour spokesperson said, these comments were made 2 years before the full facts of the case were known, and so are clearly out of date. Miss Hamilton's Conservative rival, on the other hand, Robert Alden, said, I'm sure many people will find these comments attributed to the Labour candidate shocking and concerning. Now, we also approached the Liberal Democrat candidate for a response, but one was not provided. Voters in Erdington head to the polls tomorrow, and there are 12 candidates on the ballot paper, which you can see on your screen now. Polling stations close at 10 p.m. tomorrow, and we should know who has won by the early hours of Friday morning. For those listening on the radio, these candidates are available on GBNews social media.
Tom Harwood there with an extraordinary video that he's obtained. Let's go back to Nick Timothy, formerly advisor, Chief of Staff to Theresa May when she was Prime Minister. Tim, what on earth is going on in Birmingham?
Well, I think this recording is utterly extraordinary. This is a safe Labour seat that's been held since the war. Labour are the favourites to win this election. So tomorrow we may have a new Member of Parliament who has these extraordinary views, including views that seem to question the very idea of parliamentary and representative democracy. At just the time where Keir Starmer is supposedly cleaning out the Labour Parliamentary Party in London. He's actually adding to the ranks rather than taking them away.
Nick, we'll leave it there, but we appreciate your time today. Thank you very much indeed. Nick Timothy joining us for with some reaction to that extraordinary video obtained by Tom Harwood. You'll find it on our website if you'd like to review what's been said there. Let's just reflect on another story that we're going to tackle in a little bit more depth later on this hour. There was a tube strike in London yesterday. I know that people accuse us of being London-centric when we do a story about the London Underground, and that's a fair criticism. If it was happening in Glasgow or Gateshead, would we give it the attention that we have been? It's a fair point. But in this instance, a lot of you have been emailing in about the rewards that are on offer for being a tube driver. Annabelle Denham is with the IEA, the Institute of Economic Affairs, and is my studio pal throughout the course of the next couple of hours. Annabelle, I'll say hello properly to you now, and thank you. We had Stephen Pound briefly in next to you, former Labour MP, who was going to make the case, and he will later this hour, for paying tube drivers £56,000 a year, maybe more. It's a tough job, sitting in a cab, underground, long stretches, weekends, awkward shifts. They will pay what the market bears.
Well, exactly. And of course, this story is coming at the time that a storm is brewing, a storm of outrage is brewing over MPs getting a pay increase from their £82,000 a year salary. But what you've got to bear in mind is that being a tube driver is a much less skilled and much more secure role than that of a Member of Parliament. So it's interesting that these two stories are coming out in the very same week. I have to say, Colin, that I have little sympathy for the tube drivers. They're causing immense disruption at a time when commuter levels have obviously plummeted thanks to the pandemic. We don't yet know if they're going to rise again to pre-pandemic levels, but I think we can assume they're probably not, that working from home for some workers is now here to stay. So it's a denial of that basic reality that commuter numbers are falling. And it's a problem that's not going to go away, and it's a problem that... And their response to this problem is going to turn more Londoners away from the tube, of course. People will identify new ways of getting to work, be that on a bus or a bike. And we know from previous tube strikes that some people who identify new methods of getting to work actually stick with those methods once the disruption has ended. So it's turning more people away from the tube. And we've had plenty of that already with all the mask theatre that went on the London Underground, and for far longer than it did on ordinary rail services. So there's a lot that's being done to turn commuters away. Those commuter numbers are already falling. And the pay and the fact that tube drivers are probably going to be working fewer hours in the future is a reality that many workers are having to face across our economy.
The London Underground, we'll get Stephen Pound's country view on this a little later on this hour, but it does feel like a last bastion of an old type of trades union, highly regulated marketplace where it is almost a monopolistic provider. But as you say, it's not, because actually there is no direct alternative to the tube, but actually people will go on their e-scooters or their bikes, or they'll get an Uber or whatever it is. There is always an alternative.
There is indeed, and this is exactly why we ought to support the rise of e-scooters and other innovations that are going to enable people to do that last mile or last couple of miles of their commute. I'm all for people identifying new ways of getting to work, but that doesn't mean to say that the disruption hasn't been immense this week, that commuters will either have been forced to work from home or will have had very difficult journeys into work that will have impacted their productivity. And again, this is at a time when working from home is on the rise, when businesses are just getting back on their feet after the pandemic. So the timing is absolutely awful, and there's no obvious solution to this beyond either paying tube drivers more, but that would be an artificial measure, or we move towards automation and at greater speed, which actually accelerates their decline in hours and potentially down the line decline in pay.
Annabelle, many more stories for you to have a look at throughout the course of the next couple of hours. But for now, thanks very much indeed. After the break, we'll be looking at President Biden's State of the Union speech with Sebastian Gorka, formerly of the Trump White House, including the bit where there was confusion, it seems, of whether it was Ukraine or Iran where the world's problems currently lie. First, we'll have a look at the weather.
Hi there, I'm Aidan McGivern. The far north is dry and bright this afternoon, and it will stay dry at first this evening, but gloomy, damp elsewhere, that cloud and rain spreading north across the country because of these weak weather fronts, but they are introducing an awful lot of low cloud, hill fog, outbreaks of light rain and drizzle, and that weather reaches the north of Scotland through the evening, just about avoiding the Northern Isles until after midnight. So it's a gloomy night for most, those outbreaks of rain and drizzle continuing, becoming more persistent for western parts of the country during the early hours. Perhaps some clear spells in the far southeast and later for Northern Ireland as well. But in between, with the extensive cloud and rain, temperatures staying up between 7 and 9 Celsius. And so it is another dull and damp start to the day for many, especially western Scotland, northwest England, Wales and the southwest. This is a slow-moving area of cloud and rain, and it will be brighter either side of it. So for parts of eastern England, for Northern Ireland, western Scotland, some sunshine coming through. Mild in the southeast, 13 Celsius for London, 8 to 10 where it's raining in the middle, and something a bit colder there, 8 or 9 for Northern Ireland and western Scotland later. But the front slowly makes its way east on Thursday night into the start of Friday. A damp night to come, I think, for central areas. But either side, some clear spells for East Anglia, Wales, southwest England, Northern Ireland, western Scotland. I think mostly frost-free, however, because of the fairly extensive cloud cover. Perhaps a touch of frost in the west first thing if we see clear enough skies overnight. A few showers, though, following for Northern Ireland, western Scotland, Wales and the southwest. The cloudy and damp zone pushes into eastern parts of the country through much of Friday. Then it peters out through the weekend, so most places turning drier and brighter.
My name's Tom Harwood, and every weekday we bring you The Briefing live from 9:30 a.m. The stories, analysis and live debate that you need to hear.
Quite right, Tom, of course.
Was this something that had been considered at all?
Difficult to answer.
Gas-guzzling helicopters circling. Noise is being made here.
Joe Biden walking out. Thank you very much for joining us. Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. on GB News.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're watching Colin Brazier on GB News on TV, online and on radio. Winston Churchill, Sir Winston Churchill, said a politician should never let a good crisis go to waste, and the Ukraine crisis has been an opportunity for some politicians to recover lost ground. Boris Johnson's position looks a bit more assured than it did. In France, Emmanuel Macron has seen his response to the invasion bring him a boost in the presidential election polls. The exception to the rule seems to be America's Joe Biden. His approval rating has hit a new low, just a fraction higher than the worst figure ever posted by Donald Trump. Last night, during his State of the Union address, Mr. Biden seemed confused when he talked about Iran when he meant Ukraine.
Let's continue to draw inspiration from the iron will of the Ukrainian people. To our fellow Ukrainian Americans who forged the deep bond that connects our two nations, we stand with you. We stand with you. Putin may circle Kyiv with tanks, but he'll never gain the hearts and souls of the Iranian people. He'll never extinguish their love of freedom, and he will never weaken the resolve of the free world.
Joining me now, the host of the America First radio show and former advisor to the Trump White House, Dr. Seb Gorka. Seb Gorka, welcome to you and appreciate your time. On the kind of transposing Iran when he meant Ukraine, I just introduced a guest at the top of the hour, well-known guest, former advisor to Theresa May, Nick Timothy. At the end, I called him Tim. It does happen. I'm not 79. What's my excuse?
You don't need an excuse, Colin. You're hosting a show on GB News. You don't have a military aide 30 feet from you 24 hours a day, even while you're sleeping, with a very large briefcase that has the launch codes for America's nuclear missiles. So, let's horses for courses. And as a friend of mine tweeted out, less than a minute into the speech, he said, how are we 15 seconds in and Biden's already slurring? I mean, that wasn't one little faux pas. It was all through the evening. He couldn't finish sentences. He misspoke again and again and again. Let's not forget, Colin, this is an individual who's had 2 brain aneurysms already. So it's really quite frightening that this is the man in control of our nuclear arsenals.
I've covered one of these when I was briefly in Washington, covered one of these State of the Union speeches, Seb, and it's one of those great big sort of set-piece occasions, isn't it? And you wonder how much they really matter. They worry to people inside the Beltway and all that stuff, don't they? But Middle America, do they really care? Does it matter?
when we've got double-digit inflation, which wasn't mentioned once, when we've got 2 million illegal aliens having crossed the border in just the first year of the Biden administration, and he lies to us brazenly saying, oh, we're going to secure the border. What, by letting another 2 million in? When he says, oh, we're going to fund the police, when his whole party had this BLM defund the police mantra for 2 years, I think it matters. But beyond the navel gazing inside the Beltway, you know who it really matters for? The Western civilization, the alliance of NATO nations, and the Ukrainians who are watching this speech. I mean, we had this virtue signaling, the Democrats with these little Ukrainian flag stickers on their lapels. Now we're being told that the Democrats are the arbiters, the supporters of freedom and liberty. Well, what about the last 2 years? COVID mandates, masks, or what about the people being hunted down after the January 6th quote-unquote insurrection? The barefaced cheek of these people is shocking. And also, sadly, I think the Ukrainians may be drawing the wrong conclusions about how vociferously we have their back.
Seb, Hillary Clinton, unsurprisingly, yesterday tweeted that, thank goodness, she said, that we've got Joe Biden in the White House when the world faces uncertain times, and Ukraine in particular. I'm a little less certain. I mean, it's a counterfactual. We don't know, do we? We don't know. Nobody can say with utter conviction whether we would have reached this pass if there was still Donald Trump in the White House rather than Joe Biden. What do you think?
Hillary saying, thank you that Joe Biden is in the White House. I'll respond to the crooked Hillary. Thank the good Lord she's not in the White House, because it could be even worse. Look, I know as a fact that my old boss, if he was still in the White House, this invasion would not have occurred. For the first president, not even the great Ronald Reagan, did what we did. When we had 200 Russian mercenaries destabilizing Syria, what did we do? We didn't invade. We're not neoconservatives. We had the DOD kill them. 200 Russian mercenaries were killed on our say-so, and that sent a message to Putin, and that sent a message to all dictators. And when it comes to who's responsible, yes, the psychotic Putin is responsible for the invasion. But Colin, you know as well as I do, he never would have pulled the trigger if we hadn't witnessed the disastrous surrender of Afghanistan. When we saw American forces tuck their tail between their legs, desert the only strategic airfield in the whole region, and run home to mama. When we saw 13 warfighters needlessly murdered by ISIS outside that Kabul airport, Putin said, okay, guys, get ready. It's time to roll.
Dr. Seb Gorka. Seb, really appreciate your thoughts as ever. Thank you very much.
Anytime.
Annabelle Denham is alongside me just for a brief thought or two about the State of the Union in America under Joe Biden. Easy to get your words wrong, but there are those who feel that is a broader illustration of a certain lack of acumen, diplomatic or otherwise.
And there's a trend there, isn't there? This is not the first time that President Biden has scuffed his words. And this, of course, is coming at a time when the international order feels as though it's breaking down, when our faith in international institutions to deal with crises and the sense that they're terribly outdated and were designed to deal with crises past rather than the one we're currently facing is breaking down. Perception really matters. I can't speak to the president's health, but the idea you have somebody in the White House who isn't able to give a speech without slurring his words, it does make you worry about how the Russian president is going to respond to that. Of course, it's not helped by the fact that Trump over the past few weeks has made some pretty extraordinary and outlandish statements about
That's what he does, Annabelle.
Well, that's true.
Does.
That is true. That's his pattern. But over the Ukraine crisis and whether it would have happened on his watch, and like you said, Colin, we can't speak to the counterfactual. It's impossible to know. I am willing to believe that he may have agreed to put in writing via a treaty or something similar that Ukraine wouldn't join NATO. Perhaps that could have prevented the crisis, but it's really impossible to say.
It's impossible to know, but he does.
Nobody could have seen it escalating.
No, he styles himself as the great deal maker. That would have been the deal probably would have stopped this war, wouldn't it? I imagine, but we don't know. We don't know for sure. Annabelle, for now, thanks very much. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, it's time for our debate today. We're asking, should we open the border to Ukrainian refugees? First, the latest news headlines with Miranda.
Thank you, Colin. It's 4:34. The top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has told the Commons Russia's actions in Ukraine fully qualify as a war crime. Ahead of Prime Minister's questions, Ukraine's ambassador to the UK, who was watching proceedings, was welcomed with a standing ovation. Well, Boris Johnson praised Ukraine and its people for their resolve. He also said he told President Volodymyr Zelensky the UK will do everything it can to accelerate the delivery of weapons.
Mr. Speaker, with the continued heroism and resolve of the Ukrainian people, which is so amazing that we've seen over the last few days, and with the unity of the West that we are seeing, which I think has also taken aback President Putin, I've no doubt at all, Mr. Speaker, that he will fail and that we will succeed in protecting Ukraine.
Kill Paris! Well, in Ukraine itself, the State Emergency Service says more than 2,000 civilians have been killed since the start of the Russian invasion. Hundreds of structures, including transport facilities, hospitals, kindergartens and homes, have also been destroyed. The World Health Organization says Ukrainians may face imminent shortages of cancer medicines and insulin. The UN's Refugee Agency says more than 874,000 people have now fled Ukraine to neighbouring countries since the conflict began. Most of them are in Poland, which has also taken in almost 500,000 refugees. And companies have also been taking action against Russia. US aeroplane manufacturer Boeing has suspended parts and maintenance for the country's airlines. Google has blocked mobile apps connected to news channels RT and Sputnik. And Apple has halted the sale of its products and restricted its map services. Ford has also interrupted its operations. Well, on TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News, and we'll be straight back to Brazier after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, the vast majority of people object strongly to the idea of throwing open Britain's borders to all comers. But there is strong support, it seems, for helping Ukrainians right now. The government's doubled to 200,000 the number of Ukrainians who can come under a humanitarian visa scheme. It's also launched a sponsorship programme that means businesses, community groups, councils, even individuals can sponsor a Ukrainian to come to the UK to work for 12 months. But to what extent, if at all, does sympathy for Ukrainian refugees extend to other nationalities? There was a lot of sympathy for Afghans, you'll remember, brought to the UK 6 months ago, but then came, in some quarters at least, a kind of buyer's remorse. 12,000 Afghans still live in hotels amid some reluctance to give them a permanent home. And there's another question. Some argue that enthusiasm for Ukrainians is all about their white skin. But isn't that a disgusting slur on many of us? Isn't the truth more complicated than that? Polls show that we Britons are receptive to foreigners who show a willingness to work hard, obey our laws and assimilate. For that reason, government plans to give a home to Hong Kongers, for instance, are popular. Allowing in economic migrants from the Middle East appear less so. Joining me in this debate, the Refugee and Migrant Rights Programme Director at Amnesty International, that is Steve Valdez-Simons, and Research Fellow at the Bow Group, Benjamin Loughnane. Gentlemen, appreciate both your time today. Thanks for joining us. Benjamin, let's start with you, if I may. We're not talking about open borders in this instance, are we? We're talking about saying to up to 200,000 Ukrainians, your need is great, we welcome you.
Yeah, no, I think with the Ukraine situation, it's exceptional circumstances. This is one where even people, I think, who are to some degree sceptical about a lot of asylum claims in other scenarios would be actually in favour of with regards to the Ukrainians. A lot of people have sort of unfairly suggested that that's because they are European or they are more similar to us than, for example, the Middle Eastern ones. But I think it's just the fact that it's very close to home. We feel a lot more of a relationship to it, and also it's the natural human empathy of seeing people who are in distress. But what the Ukrainians, I think, ultimately want isn't to go far from home to resettle in a new country. They want to be able to live their lives in Ukraine as they have been before. They want to live in a free Ukraine, in a Ukraine where they are not being oppressed or having their land stolen. And that should be where we're putting our priorities. It shouldn't be about saying, right, we're immediately jumping to the solution of bringing them over to Britain. First, we should be looking at how we can ensure that they can remain in Ukraine free in the way that they have done for their entire lives beforehand.
Steve Valdez-Simons, it's a story that is only just beginning, in a sense, to play out, isn't it? We're seeing camera crews on the borders of Poland, Hungary, elsewhere, substantial numbers of people, tens of thousands of people coming across the borders, bound principally for the nearer European countries like Germany, before the UK plays a significant role. But it's putting the refugee question on the table. It's encouraging a response from members of the public, from the media, from MPs, and I'm guessing that alone you would welcome.
Well, I think it's very important. It does highlight, as you say, that countries on the borders of crisis and conflict do end up carrying a much greater responsibility than do countries like ours. Often, it has to be said, more wealthy and stable countries further away. That is as true of Ukraine as it's been of Afghanistan, Syria, Sudan, or anywhere else that you could point to. And the emphasis here ought to be that if we are truly to both stand with Ukrainian refugees or any refugee who is fleeing, we also need to stand with the nations on those borders who are being asked to deal with hundreds of thousands of people at their borders in Poland at the moment. We should be taking some share of responsibility so that all Ukrainians find safety and the countries most affected have some real relief from the degree of stress that they are put under.
What's to disagree with on that, Benjamin Loughnane? I can't find anything in what Steve just said remotely objectionable. Ukrainians are fleeing a war zone. They should be welcomed.
No, I don't think it's objectionable at all. I think it's very well intentioned and completely compassionate and logical, and the fair thing that most people would feel. What I'm worried about is what message we send to Putin if we jump immediately to saying that we are going to extract people. Are we conceding the war before it's even fought? Are we giving Putin a victory from the off, saying he's definitely going to take that territory and we're going to need to take in hundreds of thousands of refugees as a result? I think the message it sends is one of concession.
I mean, it's been advanced privately, hasn't it, as a view, this Steve Valdez-Simons, that you are playing to the Putin playbook by not encouraging refugees to come to safe havens, but by making it even possible.
I just think that's a really bizarre position to take. This is not about extracting people. This is about people who are fleeing across borders because of bombs and missiles that are falling on them and that they are afraid of. And that is always the case with refugees. A refugee is only a person who has already fled. The convention is there for people who have had to flee their country and need safety. And the whole international basis for this is that rather than the countries immediately at borders having to take all responsibility, the international community is there sharing responsibility and playing its part. And we should be doing that too.
Let's just move this on a little bit. Steve Valdez-Simons, I mean, for some people, I say some people, not everybody, but for some people, this is an unambiguous refugee crisis. People are fleeing events that they've seen unfold before them in real time. I heard a BBC correspondent a week ago talking about what happened in 2015. I was one of the reporters sent to cover it at the time, and how it prompted 1 million Syrians to flee, predominantly to Germany. Now, that's just factually incorrect. So, you've seen the numbers and the locations that people were coming from. Yes, there were, doubtless, hundreds of thousands of Syrians who were fleeing their war-torn country, but they were joined by others whose need was less pressing. I mean, I know you're probably going to argue about that point, but there were many others, and many of them were economic migrants.
Let's be clear, I will argue that with you. Firstly, at the time that you mention, the vast majority of people on the particular journeys you refer to, I was there in Hungary, actually, watching the people and being there, doling out food with volunteers on the ground, and I was very happy to do that. The vast majority of people on those journeys originally were Syrian, and they were joined, you're right, by people from other countries, many of whom were by much more neglected conflicts and persecution elsewhere, including Afghans, including people fleeing conflicts in sub-Saharan Africa. And we do have to understand that it's not just the countries that make the news and get a lot of attention, as no doubt Ukraine will, and no reason why it should not, and obviously Syria did. There are many conflicts around the world, and hardly any of the people who flee from those come to countries like ours, but some do, and we should be there to protect them.
Steve, let me just put that to Benjamin Loughnane. I mean, Ben, I'm not going to agree with Steve on that. I mean, I've read reports, you've read them too. We're not going to agree on the proportion of people who, were fleeing legitimately, if I can use that word, a war zone, and the proportion of people who were economic migrants. I think the proportion of economic migrants vis-a-vis in quotes, legitimate refugees was much higher than a lot of people have said. I mean, a lot of people who were apparently from Syria were actually from the Balkans, it later transpired. You can make a stab at what you think the proportion is, but Steve does have a point, doesn't he, when he says very often people who are hitting the road have done so because of very extenuating circumstances. But I think Benjamin is... Can you hear us? No, he's frozen. He's frozen. Let's go back to Steve Valdez-Simons, and we'll also introduce to this conversation my studio friend today, Annabel Denham from the IEA, who perhaps might be able to offer a fresh perspective on this, more from the economic point of view, I suppose, Annabel, which is that we've got a demographic crisis in our country, haven't we, at the moment? We can do with some extra bodies.
Well, yes, absolutely. We know that ending free movement of people from the European Union was going to be damaging to our economy, and that was reflected in labour shortages. And granted, there was data out today from the ONS showing that much of the shortfall had been plugged by non-EU migrants, but there's huge variation across industries there. We still have fewer workers in food and retail, even if the shortfalls in care and health have been made up. I mean, to the question on whether we ought to be offering asylum to Ukrainian refugees, I'm fully supportive of that measure, and I agree with Benjamin that these people want to return to Ukraine. We don't yet know what the end game is here for Putin, where this crisis will end. But what we do know is that most of the people will not be coming to the UK permanently, and therefore it makes sense to allow them to come to the UK for a year or two to be able to work here, to be able to stay here as such a time that is safe for them to return to Ukraine.
Annabelle, more from you later, and we'll say thank you to Steve Valdez-Simons and to Benjamin Loughnane, who's unfrozen now, but froze at the critical moment. Gentlemen, thanks both very much indeed. After the break, I'll be joined by the former Labour MP, Stephen Pound, to discuss the London Underground strike and what we pay tube drivers. First, let's have a look at the weather for you.
Hi there, I'm Aidan McGivern. The far north is dry and bright this afternoon, and it will stay dry at first this evening, but gloomy, damp elsewhere, that cloud and rain spreading north across the country because of these weak weather fronts, but they are introducing an awful lot of low cloud, hill fog, outbreaks of light rain and drizzle, and that weather reaches the north of Scotland through the evening, just about avoiding the Northern Isles until after midnight. So it's a gloomy night for most, those outbreaks of rain and drizzle continuing, becoming more persistent for western parts of the country during the early hours. Perhaps some clear spells in the far southeast and later for Northern Ireland as well. But in between, with the extensive cloud and rain, temperatures staying up between 7 and 9 Celsius. And so it is another dull and damp start to the day for many, especially western Scotland, northwest England, Wales and the southwest. This is a slow-moving area of cloud and rain, and it will be brighter either side of it. So for parts of eastern England, for Northern Ireland, western Scotland, some sunshine coming through. Mild in the southeast, 13 Celsius for London, 8 to 10 where it's raining in the middle, and something a bit colder there, 8 or 9 for Northern Ireland and western Scotland later. But the front slowly makes its way east on Thursday night into the start of Friday. A damp night to come, I think, for central areas. But either side, some clear spells for East Anglia, Wales, southwest England, Northern Ireland, western Scotland. I think mostly frost-free, however, because of the fairly extensive cloud cover. Perhaps a touch of frost in the west first thing if we see clear enough skies overnight. A few showers, though, following for Northern Ireland, western Scotland, Wales and the southwest. The cloudy and damp zone pushes into eastern parts of the country through much of Friday. Then it peters out through the weekend, so most places turning drier and brighter.
I'm Liam Halligan. Join me every weekday at 1 p.m. for On the Money, your daily dose of economics, business and consumer news. I got 25 years experience covering economics and finance. We hold grown-up discussions with a host of experts who really know their stuff. We can't buy gas and store it. That was a mistake, wasn't it?
I think it was a mistake.
Even you, Liam, don't have a crystal ball.
Inflation's a real threat.
Every weekday at 1, you're On the Money.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Well, strike action, we told you about it earlier, on the London Underground. The network often gets covered more than it ought to. Most of Britain's media are in the capital, and when they can't get to work because the tube isn't running, it becomes a story in a way that's similar. Industrial action in other parts of the country, well, it wouldn't be on your TV screens, would it? So for that reason, we hesitate before introducing our next item, but we're doing it because it raises some important questions about fair pay and what some see as the stranglehold unions hold over the public. Tube drivers, thousands of whom were on strike yesterday, can earn more than MPs. The basic salary of a full-time driver working a 36-hour-long week with 43 days of annual leave, or you can guess what it is, can you? £56,496. But with overtime, it can be considerably more. Six figures are not unknown. The perks are also quite good. Free travel around London for them and their partner, and the ability to retire early. On the other hand, drivers sometimes required to work weekends. They can't drink alcohol for 8 hours before a shift starts, and it's not a job for everyone. Working underground in a dark cabin, or cab I should say, with nobody for company isn't for everybody. The former Shadow Minister, Stephen Pound, is here to reflect on what we pay our tube drivers. Too much, too little, about right?
No, I've got absolutely no problem with the tube drivers earning as much as they can. What I have a real problem is the ineptitude of the current RMT leadership. And I think difficulties at the moment they're losing the argument. And I think, Mick Lynch is in danger of being sort of the Arthur Scargill of the trade union movement nowadays. You talk to people out there, they don't understand what this is about. They know that we've got well-paid tube drivers, as they should be. But the real situation is, what terrifies me is the prospect of a one-person operation, which could be resolved. When I was driving a bus, they used to say to me, you've got 76 bags of blood and bone behind you. You're driving a tube, you've got 1,200 people behind you. And I think the real problem there is, firstly, I don't want to go down that route. The second thing is the RMT. I mean, you've got, Eddie Dempsey posing with warlords and Steve Headley posing with a Russian hat.
These are senior RMT trade union officials.
They're the senior,
Well, seen with figures linked to Putin, not necessarily.
Well, I'm sorry, with Eddie Dempsey, he was actually with this chap. He's no longer with us, but he was the leader of the anti-Ukrainian and leadership in Donbass region. So the problem is that they've got a problem there. Now look, I think the other problem they have is that they're absolutely going flat out attacking Sadiq Khan, and they're saying to Sadiq Khan, go to Boris Johnson, go to Grant Shapps and get more money. Well, what? Wake up and smell the coffee. You can't just go and say, we want more money. You've got to make the case. Now, the problem is, at the moment, just as the miners went on strike, when there was huge coal stocks and the weather was quite reasonable, the RMT are going on strike when we're suffering a catastrophic fall in revenue on London transport because of the pandemic. This is not the time to be doing. And then to come back on this mantra, we kept London moving. Yeah, there are 5 million people use the tube every day. Not in the last year there haven't been. And as for who kept things going during the pandemic, what about the health workers? What about the police? What about all those other people? And I'm sorry, I passionately support the unions. I don't support the current way in which the RMT is making the case, because I think they're losing the argument and they're opening the door to a punitive government response, which will, and in many ways, the RMT have opened that door for the government.
Annabel Denham, as a free marketeer, you look at this a slightly different way from some people, I'm guessing. I mean, this is not something you want to see getting great subsidies from the taxpayer?
No, absolutely not. And I think a point that we haven't yet made is that the TfL, the London Underground, could be in much better shape now than it currently is had Sadiq Khan not frozen fares for 5 years. And he had no solution to make up any shortfall in revenue. Granted, the pandemic was always going to deliver a pretty devastating blow to the London Underground, but we could at least have mitigated it by going into the crisis in better shape than we did. And like I said earlier on the show, unfortunately, it is a hard economic fact that fewer people are now commuting. An increasing number of Londoners are going to choose to work from home. And what this strike action is doing is simply accelerating the move away from the London Underground, forcing people to find other routes.
Stephen, I can see yourself. You're winding up for the big one there, and I hope we made it worth your while to stick around with some nice coffee. But we are literally 5 seconds away from the top of the hour. We've got to say thank you. No more. That's it. Thanks very much.
I'm off to catch the tube.
Thanks very much indeed. Stephen Pound. Coming up very shortly on Live at 5. Care home workers in England will no longer now be sacked for refusing to be jabbed against COVID. A campaigner joins us to explain why the U-turn was necessary. Also, how would the British Army be fighting the war in Ukraine? I'll be joined by one former general. And now that it's open season on Russian oligarchs, what happens? Or perhaps it might be better to say, who happens next? At Chelsea Football Club, alongside me throughout the hour, the free speech and free market enthusiast, Annabelle Denham. But first, the headlines with Miranda.
Thank you, Colin. Good afternoon. It's 5 o'clock. The top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has told the Commons Russia's actions in Ukraine fully qualify as a war crime. Ahead of Prime Minister's questions, Ukraine's ambassador to the UK, who was watching proceedings, was welcomed with a standing ovation. Well, Boris Johnson praised Ukrainian people for their resolve. He announced the government will match up to £20 million in public donations to the Disaster Emergency Committee's Ukraine appeal. He also said he told President Volodymyr Zelensky the UK will do everything it can to accelerate the delivery of weapons.
Putin has gravely miscalculated. In his abhorrent assault on a sovereign nation, he has underestimated the extraordinary fortitude of the Ukrainian people and the unity and resolve of the free world in standing up to his barbarism. The UN General Assembly will vote later today, and we call on every nation to join us in condemning Russia and demanding that Putin turn his tanks around.
Well, in Ukraine, the State Emergency Service says more than 2,000 civilians have been killed now since the start of the Russian invasion. Hundreds of structures, including transport facilities, hospitals, kindergartens and homes, have also been destroyed. The World Health Organization says Ukrainians may face imminent shortages of oxygen, cancer medicines and insulin. President Volodymyr Zelensky says resistance has been strong and claimed Russia had lost almost 6,000 servicemen in Ukraine.
Just think about this figure, 6,000. To receive what? To receive Ukraine? It is impossible. It will not happen with rockets. It will not happen with bombs, tanks, any strikes. We are on our land, and there will be an international tribunal to prosecute them for the war against us.
Well, meanwhile, thousands of Ukrainians have said they'll stay and fight to defend their country, including MP Kira Rudik.
We have enough of stuff and we are getting more and more supplies to be able to survive the siege. We understand that Putin has nothing that could stop him except for the bravery of Ukrainian people and the support of our international partners.
A Kiev resident has told GB News of the Ukrainians' bravery during the continued shelling of the city.
Many people in Ukraine, they are strong, they are not frightened, and they are ready to fight till the end, till the last drop of blood, if it will be needed.
Well, despite all of this, the humanitarian crisis is also growing. The UN's Refugee Agency says more than 874,000 people have now fled Ukraine to neighbouring countries since the conflict began. Poland has taken in almost 500,000 refugees. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer called for the owner of Chelsea Football Club, Roman Abramovich, to face sanctions, saying now is the time to sanction every oligarch.
He's a person of interest to the Home Office because of his links to the Russian state and his public association with corrupt activity and practices. Last week, the Prime Minister said that Abramovich is facing sanctions. He later corrected the record to say that he isn't. Well, why on earth isn't he?
Mr. Speaker, it's not appropriate for me to comment on individual cases at this stage.
The owner of the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, which runs between Russia and Germany, has sacked all of its staff following US sanctions. The company, which is based in Switzerland, says it hasn't filed for bankruptcy yet, but Reuters sources suggest it could happen as soon as this week. Germany refused to grant the pipeline final approval after the Russian incursion. In other news, a 15-year-old girl has been seriously injured in a shooting at a bus stop in Liverpool. Reports of gunfire in Toxteth were heard just after 5 p.m. yesterday. The girl was taken to hospital and is in a stable condition. Police say it's a miracle that she survived. Merseyside police say a 21-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder.
The actions of those people responsible for this attack on a 15-year-old schoolgirl who is waiting in a bus stop to go home from school are utterly appalling and shocking, even with 29 years service. It shows a total disregard and contempt that they have for the decent, honest, law-abiding people who live, work and visit this city.
And to Australia now, where tens of thousands of people have fled their homes following warnings of extreme weather. 14 people have died since the worst floods on record hit both Queensland and New South Wales. Brisbane received 80% of its average annual rainfall in just a few days. Sydney is now bracing for torrential rain and flash floods. Well, this is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Brazier.
Well, look, we're not going to spend too long on Ukraine today, but we have to certainly reflect the changing situation on the ground there as best we can from this distance, at least a little bit. And the war, from Putin's perspective, does appear to be stalling to some degree. That huge convoy, stationary for days now outside Kiev and reportedly running short on supplies. Striking images also. I mean, that one almost rekindles images, if you're old enough to remember it, of the road to Basra, the infamous, I should say, highway to hell, of all those, the armoured column that was retreating from Kuwait, if you remember it, the early 1990s. But this isn't Kuwait, it's a European mainland country, it's Ukraine, that Ukrainian airstrike. Well, meanwhile, intercepted radio messages obtained by British intelligence firm Shadowbreak indicate that troops are refusing to obey Central Command orders to shell Ukrainian towns. They're also heard complaining about running out of supplies of food and fuel, some of the harsh realities of war, it seems. So why has Putin's army stalled, if it has stalled, and how will they regather their strength and push on if that's what they choose to do? Let's turn to a retired British Army officer, Major General Tim Cross, whose specialism, General Cross, was actually in logistics to a great degree. So you understand how important those logistics trains are for an army to keep advancing, for the fuel to keep running, for them to have enough ordnance to keep firing their shells. It's a major challenge.
Yeah, it is indeed. There's an old military maxim that amateurs discuss tactics, professionals discuss logistics. Now, I probably would say that, wouldn't I, being a logistician? But to sustain a major campaign like this is is big business. And there's a lot of suggestions that the Russian logistics have not been working particularly well. I'm not convinced that is as bad as the pictures that people is painting. If we go back to the initial intent of this invasion, it was, I think, to secure the eastern provinces, link up to Crimea, put the capital, Kiev, under pressure, and hopefully the Ukrainians would have come to some sort of negotiating table, and that would have been the end of it. And therefore, they've only used limited combat power up to now. And when military units go into battle to begin with, they take with them about 5 days' worth of immediate logistics: food, fuel, ammunition, spares, medical supplies, and those sorts of things. Obviously, we're now into day 7 of this campaign, day 7, day 8, and those assets will be running short. This big convoy, I'm not convinced, is designed to take Kiev and go in and fight its way through Kiev. That's what we call fighting in built-up areas, Fibua. I think it's there to go round and isolate Kiev, begin to use more combat power. I think there's no doubt the Russian military are going to use now, as they have been doing in the last 24, 48 hours, more artillery, rockets, air assault, and so on, again, to try to bring Ukraine to the negotiating table. And they're now talking about having a second set of talks. There's no way the Russians will pull out of it. So they're going to have to find some way through it.
Just on the point about logistics, if they do run out of anything, what would be the first thing they run out of? And how helpful would an air bridge into or close to Kiev be?
Well, they'll run out. I mean, fuel is one obvious thing, although they haven't travelled huge distances. But nonetheless, just running armoured vehicles when they're static consumes a fair bit of fuel. Food. The Russian soldiers, I think there's talk of Russian soldiers beginning to go into supermarkets and things and find food. So food. They haven't used an awful lot of ammunition yet, so I don't think they'll be running short of ammunition. So I think primarily it will be fuel. And what the Ukrainians can do, of course, is to attack the soft-skinned vehicles that make up the logistic convoys behind the armoured forces.
I mentioned your expertise in logistics. I read also you were involved in the development of one of our earlier versions of an anti-tank weapon. I was just talking to my guest here in the studio, Annabelle Denham, about the semantics of some elements of what the British messaging has been recently. This idea that anti-tank weapons are defensive weapons. I mean, I know you can make that argument, but if you're inside a Russian tank and a British anti-tank weapon comes through your heavy armour, eviscerating everybody inside, it doesn't feel very defensive.
No, that's true. It's in the same way that people talk about low-intensity operations. Well, they're not very low intensity. They're shooting at you. So, of course, you're right. But in terms of from a Ukrainian perspective, then they are not driving heavy armour attacking Russia. They are defending themselves against heavy armour and armoured fighting vehicles and so on. So the anti-tank guided weapons we're seeing used are, in that sense, it is absolutely right to say, defensive weapons. They're not offensive weapons. They don't take territory on their own. They simply defend you against, the heavy armour. And key to that, and you touched on this slightly earlier, if I may just throw into this, the Russians have got lots of stuff, and that convoy represents that. And they're undoubtedly going to start using more of it. They're going to use more combat power, and they're going to have to put more pressure on Ukraine to bring them to the negotiating table. But when we talk about fighting power in the British Army context, the physical component is the stuff. It's the armour, it's the helicopters, the logistics to sustain it, and so on. The conceptual component is how you use that stuff. And thus far, we haven't really seen the Russians utilising their doctrine of how to fight. The third component is a moral component of fighting power. It's about the willingness to die on the battlefield, to fight and win on the battlefield. And whilst the Ukrainians are definitely behind, in inverted commas, the Russian physical stuff, the physical component and the conceptual stuff, there's no doubt that their moral component is much, much stronger. And these rumours we're picking up about Russian soldiers being dissatisfied, running out of food, and all the other things you've been talking about, reflects the reality of that. Whilst the Ukrainians are going to be prepared to fight and die on the streets as they have been doing, and to continue that, maybe for months, if not years to come, I don't think the Russian soldiers are going to be in the same place. It's not new, this. Napoleon talked about moral is physical as 3:1. So this determination to fight is going to be a key factor in the weeks ahead. And I think the Ukrainians have got the edge on that, if they haven't got it on the other two components.
And that may be all true, Tim Cross. It may be that there is a sort of morale deficit on the Russian side, but if all you're required to do is to pull a piece of string or a lever or press a button and fire some heavy artillery into a suburban area, then you can see how that has, to put it mildly, a pretty dampening effect on morale of a civilian population. And it just feels to a lot of people lay people like myself, I suppose, that the model to some degree, sadly, tragically, is Grozny, is Chechnya. They'll be rearranging the rubble in short order, because to put pressure on the negotiating table, you just kill lots of civilians.
Yeah, well, there's certainly truth in that. I mean, I think I go back to what I said at the beginning. I don't think the Russians wanted initially to cause destruction in the way that you're talking about. I mean, Putin genuinely believes that Ukraine and Belarus are, a part of Russia, that Ukraine is the spiritual heart of Russia. He has a strong view about that. And he talks about Ukraine as being part of Russia. We're saying family. So the idea that they were going to go in and try and destroy these cities in the way that Marshal Zhukov, for example, destroyed all the cities in Germany when he pushed into Berlin in 1945 and so on, that was never, I don't think that was ever on the table to begin with. I think he wanted to do the sort of things we were talking about, put enough pressure on to bring them to the negotiating table. That has failed, and he undoubtedly will now bring to bear more combat power. Artillery, as you say, you can, a long-range artillery can fire from 25, 35, 40 kilometers away. So he can bring artillery to bear, cruise missiles, air operations, rocket attack, and so on, in an attempt to get the Ukrainian people to say to their leadership, enough, we can't take any more of this. But I go back to my moral component piece. From everything we've seen and heard, they're not going to do that. So Putin is going to find himself either having to bring to bear all of his combat power and take these cities and hold them, and then find himself in a counterinsurgency campaign, or he's going to have to pull out. And I can't see him pulling out. So, I think he's going to be stuck. It's rather like Iraq. You talked about the I was there actually in the road from Kuwait to Basra, the road of death. It's rather like those situations. He is finding himself biting off more than he can chew. And we don't want to be complacent about this. A lot of people are going to get hurt. And if he wants to win the military campaign, he will win it. But it's not going to be easy for him.
No, we can see that already, can't we? Tim Cross, really good to have you on the show today. Thanks very much indeed for your time.
Yeah,
Annabelle Denham is alongside me. We were talking during the commercial break about the fact that, well, this is more about Putin, that he was a rational actor a few days ago, but he's not the rational actor we thought he was. He's not that that former KGB colonel who just makes very logical decisions.
Certainly not. He was a rational actor until he wasn't, really. And I've certainly been stunned by the scale of invasion that he has launched on Ukraine. I simply didn't see it coming. I was expecting that he might try to annex 3 regions of Ukraine, but certainly not send troops up and down the country. And I think the fact does remain that the idea of occupying Ukraine for Putin must seem unappealing. This is a country of 45 million people. It's vast in size. So it begs the question, what is his end game now? And I suspect his end game now has been his end game for some time, but he's accelerated his time frame drastically. So no longer is it just annexation of certain regions of Ukraine. No longer is it simply trying to get a guarantee from NATO that Ukraine won't be able to join, or indeed the EU that NATO won't become a member, that Ukraine won't become a member of the EU. Now he is trying to overrun provinces along the Black Sea to Odessa. So it's gone a lot further and a lot more quickly than certainly I was anticipating. And actually the Western response has gone further than I was anticipating as well, not only in that
it's prompted big
support.
decisions. I mean, the German rearmament plan,
exactly.
for instance. Annabelle, for now, we'll say thanks very much indeed. We're going to talk about Ukraine, but in a slightly different way. And it's this way. Premier League, awash with foreign money, isn't it? Including Russian money. Roman Abramovich, the oligarch with links to Putin, has put the West London club Chelsea up for sale, inviting potential buyers to bid for the club. This week, the billionaire is also reportedly selling off his £200 million London property portfolio. There's speculation this might be to avoid having his assets frozen should he be sanctioned by the government. Obviously, we don't know for sure, Millard. Meanwhile, other major football clubs, Everton, for instance, they've suspended ties with Russian companies linked to certain individuals to some degree. So how tied up could the beautiful game become in this ugly mess that is Ukraine right now? The sports journalist Aidan McGee is here in the studio with us. On Chelsea, Aidan, it feels like Abramovich's days of running that club and owning that club and it being a sort of trophy club for him are reaching an end.
I think so, Colin. We have to say, though, that the club has effectively, in a de facto way, has been up for sale for about 3 years, ever since he pulled the plug on the £1 billion or the redevelopment of Stamford Bridge. The UK government also made it a little bit more difficult for influential Russian people to operate in the wake of the Salisbury poisonings as well. So he sensed some hostility towards the UK government. There have been discussions about takeovers, but it's kind of come to a head now. There's no doubt about that.
Look, I want to be very careful. I'm not talking about Roman Abramovich when I say this, but more generally about football, that sense that it's been possible for years now for people coming from parts of the world where governance is not a top priority, let me put it no more strongly than that, can buy a football club in the UK, and it's part of their reputational rehabilitation when they do that. And it buys them some protection as well, maybe back home. Is what's happened in Ukraine and with Chelsea, maybe, is it going to be a moment where football thinks, actually, we need to get our house in order?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, you could say that, but then you have to remember when Roman Abramovich bought Chelsea for £140 million in 2003, the Premier League looked a lot different, the landscape looks a lot different. I'm not sure the people who were running the game back then were that interested in where money came from. I think that they will scrutinise it a bit more closely now. Having said that, you've had a fit and proper persons test in place now for over 10 years, and it's been largely exposed to be utterly useless. You've had some really unsuitable owners taking over Premier League clubs and Football League clubs as well. They've practically run the place into the ground. But in terms of Abramovich, I mean, you know, there's reports today that he's looking for between £3 and £4 billion for the club. You're only going to attract a billionaire from a certain part of the world who will invite scrutiny again. It's going to be very tough to dispose of an asset just like that, and it's not exactly a seller's market if everybody knows that you've got to get out of town pretty quickly.
It's a distressed sale.
Exactly, and so £3 billion, which is the figure being quoted. I spoke to a contact in the last hour who tells me that he would think of taking maybe £2.5 billion. Now, if you look at that, if you take the first figure of 3, KPMG valued it very recently at about £1.5 billion. If you add on the debt that he's leveraged against the club of £1.5 billion as well, and you aggregate those together, then £3 billion sounds quite sensible. Having said that, for context, the previous largest takeover, or even though it was done incrementally, was Manchester United, £790 million. So it's a long way off that. You've also got the problem, Colin, of the stadium, as I mentioned a few moments ago, the redevelopment of the stadium. I mean, it was £1 billion. This is the problem that London clubs have. In West London, QPR, Fulham, all these clubs have been looking at getting new stadiums, and they just can't do it. It's not that simple. And that's another, if you're going to spend £3 billion on Chelsea Football Club, you've got to find another £1 billion to get a new stadium, because it's not maximising the revenues right now.
Aidan, for now, thanks very much indeed. Let's just show you some scenes from Moscow. We've been talking, haven't we, in recent days about the appetite there may be for protest against what's been happening in Ukraine by Russian forces in Moscow itself. Remember the very early days, there were protests in dozens of different towns and cities across Russia, all the way from Moscow, from St. Petersburg, all the way through to Siberia. People being led away in these pictures, live pictures from Moscow, in police vehicles. A protest there. I can't tell you who's involved, how many people are involved. I'm told it's a protest about the invasion of Ukraine, but live pictures there from Moscow of police activity. Bring you more as I know more. After the break, I'll be speaking with a British man on the Polish-Ukrainian border who's been helping refugees fleeing the country. But first, the weather.
Hello, good morning. I'm Aidan McGivern. A dull and damp start for most of us. Frost-free, however, with the extensive cloud overnight. And then it does turn a little brighter in some places later this afternoon. But at the moment, there's a weather front crossing the country very slowly because it's coming up against high pressure to the east, and it's a weakening feature. However, it is bringing an extensive area of cloud and outbreaks of rain to Scotland, western parts of England, as well as Wales. Hill fog as well, but that area of cloud and rain narrowing, and so it's less extensive by the afternoon, and that means that parts of eastern England will brighten up. Plenty of sunshine here, highs of 10 to 13 Celsius. Where it's raining across central parts of the country, 9 or 10 degrees. But by the end of the afternoon, West Wales, Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, Southwest England also sees brighter skies developing to the rear of the front, and a few showers starting to arrive. Most of those showers stay offshore overnight and inland, I think, for Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, Wales and the southwest under clear skies. A touch of frost is possible, also for East Anglia. But away from those areas, we keep the cloud, we keep those outbreaks of rain going, very slowly edging east, so that it's the eastern Scotland, northeast England, into the Midlands and the southeast where we'll see a lot of cloud and outbreaks of rain during Friday morning. The rain tending to be on and off, but it will be fairly persistent for eastern Scotland, northeast England, and it will be falling as snow over the tops of the Grampians. Brighter weather, meanwhile, for western Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, western England. Temperatures typically up at 9 or 10 degrees in the south, 7 to 8 degrees further north. Those temperatures head slightly downwards during Saturday and Sunday, but at the same time, most places will see the weather turn drier and brighter, albeit with just 1 or 2 showers.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone we learn from it and try and move on. That's it. Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Perhaps you saw some of our coverage yesterday. You may have seen Boris Johnson, who was speaking in Poland, said more than 200,000 Ukrainians could be allowed to join family in the UK. Well, let's speak to one man who was recently on the Polish-Ukrainian border, helping people there to leave. That is Patrick Ney, a British national living in Poland, who joins us now. Patrick, appreciate your time. What's it been like there?
I went to the border last night. It's a round trip about 160 miles from Warsaw, the capital of Poland, where I live. So there at about 7:30 at night. I've described the atmosphere as controlled chaos. There's enough organisation that does the chaos. Relatively calm. I was on the Polish side, not the Ukrainian side. The Polish police border guards, as well as a whole bunch of incredibly inspiring police who've been on since 7 in the morning, and it was already, I think, 8 or 9 by the time who are helping the people who are trickling across the border in ever-growing numbers to get transport. That's why I was there. So, myself and an Irish Damien, 2 cars, we managed to get 9 from the border to safety. Now trip with 8 hours of driving. I think they were really quite happy to be in.
Patrick, we've got some technical problems, not for the first time, so I do apologise. We'll try and maybe tinker with that line in such a way that you become audible. You're not at the moment, but appreciate your efforts to join us with your story today, Patrick Ney. Let's just take you back to Moscow, those live pictures showing police arrests there. Well, actually, the police activity seems to have slowed down a little bit, but I'll show you these live pictures, partly to tell a story about the arrest of, what was it, 5 children aged 7 to 11 who'd been holding up placards in Moscow today opposing the war in Ukraine. There is an intolerance from this regime, it would appear, in the Kremlin against any kind of dissent. Annabelle Denham is alongside me as my presenter's friend today over the course of these 2 hours while we're on air, and continue looking at those pictures from Moscow if we possibly can. Annabelle, we know, don't we, if anything that we know about this regime in Moscow is that they have a very low tolerance of political opposition.
And yes, civil disobedience. I've been very impressed and surprised at the scale of it. These are people who could be facing imprisonment for treason. It's not to be taken lightly, but nonetheless, you can only imagine how appalled a number of people in Russia must feel at the action that Putin has taken in Ukraine. There are many people who are living close to the border who would have had relatives living in Ukraine. And like I've said before, many people simply didn't expect this level of action, and therefore this level of civilian casualties, this full-scale invasion that's going to be absolutely devastating to Ukraine. So it's not altogether surprising that the people of Russia are taking to the streets, but it's nonetheless brave of them to do so.
Having been depressed for days by this story, I actually woke up this morning and thought, that it's not impossible that we get an outcome which sees the removal of Putin and the replacement, hopefully by something better, but actually better in terms. I mean, even someone like Alexei Navalny, the poster boy of a lot of people outside of Russia, he's quite a Russian nationalist. He's quite a social conservative. I mean, there's bits of Alexei Navalny I really like, but I'm not sure many of our liberal friends would.
Well, no, but you've got to consider the lesser of two evils and hope that if the Putin regime is indeed brought down, then the person who replaces him is a more rational political actor, shall we say. Certainly, the hope is that the climate of opinion changes in Russia, not just among members of the public, of course, but among Russian oligarchs. Putin is not a king. He is among equals. He's a leader among equals, and he's propped up by these oligarchs who, of course, now are going to suffer under the sanctions that are being imposed by the West. So the hope is that the pressure does start to mount on Putin and his situation becomes untenable. But there's always a risk that the person who replaces him might have more radical views and take more radical action.
Putin's not a king. He behaves like one, though, doesn't he? Well, an old-fashioned king. Annabelle, thanks very much indeed. Let's go back to Patrick Ney. We think we've sorted out our sound problems. Patrick, you were just talking about organised chaos, I think was the phrase you used, on the border. What are the numbers looking like? I'm guessing the numbers are increasing. Are we talking about hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands? What is it?
Well, I hope you can hear me fine, Colin. Just jump in if you can't. When I was there yesterday, there were groups. However, in terms of the total number of people coming to Poland, it's now something like over 500,000 in just a week. So to put that into context, that's more than all the people who came in the 2015 migrant crisis in 1 week. I think that what the Polish nation are doing, both the government as well as individuals and citizens, is quite simply the largest mobilization of any nation to go to the aid of another one that I personally can ever think of, including the Second World War. It's quite magnificent.
And it was your wife came out yesterday, I'm told.
My wife is an employee of the British Embassy, and she's with the crisis response team at the moment on the border. As you can imagine, the UK is active in many different ways, not only supporting Ukraine financially with equipment, but the British Embassy in Warsaw is playing a crucial role in supporting British nationals coming over the border, as well as assisting in the aid supply.
Patrick, is it possible to talk about the attitude of ordinary Poles? I mean, this has been a contested border over the years, over the decades, over the centuries. The map has changed a lot. The border's moved with it. Talk to us about ties of kinship, ethnic ties, historical ties, and the sort of welcome that people are given.
Boy, that's a big question, Colin. As you know, I know you know a bit about Central and Eastern European history, and indeed the city that the 3 Nigerian students who travelled in my car yesterday came from, Lviv, used to be Polish. It was a part of the Republic of Poland, the Second Republic of Poland, until the entire country was shifted to the west by Joseph Stalin. So this is not known as the Borderlands region for no reason. There are multiple shifting ethnic, national, religious groups which spread over all of this area. There has been some bad blood between Poland and Ukraine. There were many bad things that happened in the Second World War. But many people are now saying that what the Polish nation is doing is writing a new chapter in Polish-Ukrainian relations. I have seen hundreds of messages from Ukrainian people on support groups all around the internet saying, we never thought that anyone would come to the aid of our women and children as you have. I call this the 21st century Dunkirk. Thousands of volunteers such as myself paying their own way, paying for their own fuel, driving down in the equivalent of their little boats or their little cars to the border, all the border points on the Ukraine-Polish border, and ferrying people back to safety. I've never seen anything like this. It is quite simply spectacular. And best
Patrick,
of all,
we're out of time, but it's a fascinating story you tell, and you tell it so well, and we hopefully will get you back on maybe tomorrow to tell us some more about it. For now, thanks very much indeed, Patrick Ney there. Philippe Sands wrote a book called East West Street about that part of the world. Comes very well recommended. Coming up very soon, we're going to give you in fact right now, the latest news headlines.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's 5:35. The top stories. The Prime Minister has told the Commons Russia's actions in Ukraine fully qualify as a war crime. Ahead of Prime Minister's questions, Ukraine's ambassador to the UK, who was watching proceedings, was welcomed with a standing ovation. Well, Boris Johnson praised Ukraine and its people for their resolve. He also said he told President Volodymyr Zelensky the UK will do everything it can to accelerate the delivery of weapons.
Mr. Speaker, with the continued heroism and resolve of the Ukrainian people, which is so amazing that we've seen over the last few days, and with the unity of the West that we are seeing, which I think has also taken aback President Putin, I've no doubt at all, Mr. Speaker, that he will fail and that we will succeed in protecting Ukraine.
Kill Paris!
Well, in Ukraine itself, the State Emergency Service says more than 2,000 civilians have been killed since the start of the Russian invasion. Hundreds of structures, including transport facilities, hospitals, kindergartens and homes, have also been destroyed. The World Health Organization says Ukrainians may face imminent shortages of oxygen, cancer medicines and insulin. The UN's Refugee Agency says more than 874,000 people have now fled Ukraine to neighbouring countries since the conflict began. Most of them are in Poland, which has taken in almost 500,000 refugees. And more companies have been taking action against Russia. US aeroplane manufacturer Boeing has suspended parts and maintenance for the country's airlines. Google has blocked mobile apps connected to news channels RT and Sputnik. And Apple has halted the sale of its products and restricted map services. Ford has also paused its operations as well. Well, on TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Back to Brazier after the break. Stay with us.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now, the government revealed yesterday that the no jab, no job policy in care homes would end by March the 15th. The policy led to roughly 40,000 workers losing their jobs, according, that is, to an estimate by the Department of Health and Social Care. The U-turn comes after a consultation showed that nearly 90% of respondents were against the mandate. The government's also argued that the quote, science has changed and that the policy was right at the time. Well, it's now clear, of course, that Omicron, less serious than previous strains, and transmission is not halted by the jab to some degree. Joining us to discuss this, co-founder of the Together Declaration, Alan Miller. Alan, take this the right way, I hope, but you were a very regular contributor on this news channel for a while. I've seen a bit less of you recently, and that's a cause for rejoicing, but that's not personal.
No, well, we should be rejoicing at the fact that we've now managed to ensure that both vaccine passports and vaccine mandates have ended. But there's a but, isn't there? Because then there's 40,000 people who had to leave. This should never have happened in the first place. It should never have been in place. They need to be brought back in and compensated for the time they've missed. We've got a care home crisis. There's also another big but, Colin, which is that all the stuff that Together and the Together Declaration is campaigning around has always been around rights and freedoms and open debate. And we've got a situation where, whilst we're told the Coronavirus Act will end, we know in Scotland that emergency powers have been continued, but whilst we're told the Coronavirus Act will end, we're now seeing that at least two of the measures will be retained. Some will go into the Public Health Act, which was used for lockdowns, not emergency powers, and the other into the Police Crime Sentencing Bill. And we're going to keep campaigning to ensure the public has its voice. We now have a really big base of signatories, over 260,000. And we're going to keep campaigning to ensure that our rights and freedom, things like the online safety bill as well, and around these issues. And in fact, tonight we've got a debate on the Human Rights Act and the Bill of Rights. I think the point is that when these measures are imposed, often without thinking, sometimes due to modelling, and we're treated with contempt as the public and workers, we need to ensure that the government steps back now and does not do that again. And that's also why we're having a public inquiry together to ensure that we have a full reckoning of what's happened in the last 2 years, and that we don't again have a situation where the public is sidelined and parliamentary scrutiny is put off the table. We can't allow for that to happen again. So perhaps you're not rejoicing too soon. You might be hearing a bit more from us.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Alan, this is my shameless plug. I had an hour-long conversation on tape. Well, not on tape anymore, but you know what I mean, recorded this morning with Lord Sumption, Jonathan Sumption, former Supreme Court judge, who at times, as I'm sure you'll agree with me, felt like a voice in the wilderness, didn't he, in the early days of COVID, some of the points he was making. You mentioned the Public Health Act, and he's got some very strong views on that. We'll be putting that up as a podcast in the next few days, and I recommend people who are interested in the intersection between the law, COVID and government. He's absolutely fascinating on that subject. Just in terms of the human dimension to this now, Alan, those people who were threatened with a big stick in care, and I don't know about you, but I felt very strongly, particularly interviewing, highly credentialed doctors who made the point to the government, we're not going to be jabbed. They were very networked. They had great powers of persuasion, but they were not, and they were listened to. And I just felt they were handled differently from those poor care workers who maybe didn't have those networking skills, presentational skills, call it what you like, to make their case. And you know, some thousands lost their jobs, right?
Well, I mean, one of the things is representation is really important and having a voice. Care home workers were also presented with the really sharp narrative that you're, you know, putting lives, vulnerable lives at risk and danger. Although if we know that transmissions were not prevented from the vaccination, and they were there to protect individuals taking it, particularly those vulnerable, very old and with comorbidities, then that wasn't the case. But yes, I mean, as with many things, it's always the voice of the public, being able to represent yourself, the fact that unions just didn't do anything. And that's why with Together Declaration, working with NHS 100K and others, Workers of England Union, we've basically got a situation now where people do have a voice. We're going to make sure that it's heard continually. We know that elections are coming up. We promised people that depending on the MP's position, people's votes would depend on it. And we still have a lot of outstanding issues that have not gone away, like the measures coming in, the police crime sentencing bill, online safety bill. We need to ensure that the public does not have our freedoms encroached. When everyone quite rightly is talking about freedom around the world, these are not vacuous terms, and we should absolutely applaud people elsewhere that fight for them. But in the UK, there are some severe issues that are still impacting us, and Together Declaration is going to insist that we can still have our voices heard. And the point about now, what's different to then is we are going to keep very vigilant eyes on anyone who's being pushed or coerced to do measures that they should not be. And we're going to have a voice of representation that's going to be ongoing. People will hear from us in the May elections and ongoing. We're not standing, but we'll be making sure MPs hear from constituents. And we now are not going to be sidelined again.
Miller, we'll talk to you soon. That seems pretty likely. For now, though, thanks very much indeed for your time. Thanks a lot. Annabelle Denham alongside me listening to that. I read, just before I came on air, Annabelle, there's a care home association conference going on in the UK right now, and there was a quotation I saw from a senior care home manager who talked about the COVID period and how he saw customers, patients, I'm not sure exactly what you call them, people living in care homes, elderly folk, losing the will to live, no contact with their loved ones, and the phrase he used was they simply lost the will to live.
But it's hard. I mean, it's hardly surprising. And 2 years have passed since the really acute, or nearly 2 years since the really acute care home crisis, when a lot of people were discharged from hospital and sent to care homes, and COVID was just rampant.
Sent to care homes, but then denied any contact with family.
Denied any contact with family. And you know, it's just a terrible way for a society to treat its elderly. It was obviously a panicked move at a time of complete emergency. When it comes to the vaccine mandate, I mean, how fortunate really for the government that Omicron came along when it did, because it had taken itself so far down this vaccine mandate road that it was going to be very difficult to row back on.
Do you think they always planned to do the U-turn?
It surely was inevitable. As we know, 40,000 people have already left the sector. That number would have increased dramatically. There would have been acute staffing shortages, at a time when social care is in dire need of reform across the board. And there obviously is this staffing shortfall, and there was always this stick approach to staff in health and social care not getting the vaccine. It was never a carrot. There was never, to me at least, seemed to be an effort to understand why it was that these people weren't getting the vaccine and attempt to educate and communicate with them on why they should.
We're going to move to a happier health story now, a medical breakthrough that could make life a bit easier for the better half of the population. Women who have the HPV vaccine may need only one smear test to prevent cervical cancer in their lifetime, a leading scientist has revealed. Women are currently invited for screening every 3 to 5 years in the UK. Let's turn to NHS GP, Dr. Veena Babu, who joins us now. Veena, welcome to you. I don't know, but I'm told smear tests are not a lot of fun, and not over the course of a woman's lifetime, multiple of them. But so having only one, glory be.
Absolutely. And I can speak on most women's behalf when I say that actually uptake is quite low. Although we encourage them, there's lots of media coverage around it. As doctors, we encourage patients to get their routine smear tests. For multiple different reasons, lots of women don't like it. They don't enjoy it. They find it uncomfortable. They put it off. And cervical cancer is one of those cancers which, when it does present, often it can be quite late. It's spread. It's at a stage where, surgery or other treatments are needed. So even if you have no symptoms, if you're from the age of 25 and you've been invited for smear tests, please go and attend. If this research actually works, I have to be honest, Colin, it's not going to happen overnight. It's still going to be another 5-10 years until everyone has a confidence of maybe just getting one test done. But it would be a game changer, absolutely.
And just when we were reading ahead of that, when I was reading ahead of our interview, Veena, the idea that HPV, the idea of a virus causing a cancer, a virus causing genetic disruption, changing your DNA. I mean, when we think there's lots of reasons, there's lots of causes to cancer. We are clearly, we just don't understand. But that clear linkage between a virus and changes to our DNAs, I mean, how common is that in cancer? Is it just this one?
It's specifically cervical cancer, and it's a very good question because what the smear test tests for is the virus, which is HPV. It's a family of viruses. It stands for human papilloma virus, and there are hundreds of it, but there are specific types that contribute to cervical cancer. So when we do the smear test, and if you're tested positive for the virus, it means we test you more regularly. So instead of 3 years, it might be every 6 months or 3 months to see are those changes happening more frequently so we can prevent the progression of cancer. And often when people get tested positive for HPV, there is a misconception. Lots of people think, oh, have I got an STI? Have I got an STD? Like a sexual infection? It's not a sexual infection. However, it is spread via skin-to-skin contact. So it's only seen in people once they become sexually active. So it's quite different.
Yeah. Veena, you've made that really clear. So that's fantastic. Veena Babu, thanks ever so much as ever. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Annabelle Denham alongside me. Annabelle, reflect on this if you want to. You can just talk about, the medical dimension if you like. But I read up on this story before the show. I looked at the BBC website. I pay the licence fee. I think I'm entitled to have a look at it. And they wrote up this story, and they did so with these words: "So the NHS invites women, and people with a cervix for regular screening." That's the BBC. Any thoughts?
Well, the BBC is joining part of the zeitgeist. I happen to think that it won't be too long before they drop, we all drop, the word woman, and it just becomes people with a cervix. I think we're bridging that chasm in 2 leaps, but that's the end point. But, let's not turn too much attention away from what is obviously a fantastic breakthrough. I read that only 70% of women who were eligible for the smear in 2020 actually came forward and got it. Yeah. So, the numbers have been dropping, my understanding is, over recent years. And I remember the just absolute tragic case of Jade Goody, that Big Brother contestant who didn't get her smear test, and she ended up, terribly, tragically dying of cervical cancer. And that had such an impact of women my age, women my generation. Not getting a smear test is simply something I wouldn't dream of doing. But I think we have short memories. A lot of young women today wouldn't necessarily know who she was. Would just really echo, the campaign and urge women to come forward and get that smear to prevent.
Amen to that. Annabelle, thanks for now. Let's just go back to Ukraine, in particular the Wall Street Journal reporter, Brett Forrest, who can join us now. I think, Brett, from Lviv in the west of Ukraine, a part of Ukraine much contested over the centuries. Brett, bring us up to speed with what you've seen today.
Good to be with you, sir. Another day of unbelievable action across the country. The Russian forces have seemingly taken control of the important port city in the south, Kherson. We've been speaking with people there all day who've been taking shelter. The city and the Azov Sea on the coast in the south, Mariupol, it has really been surrounded. People from inside the city are complaining that there's no way out. And in Kharkiv, on the Russian border in the northeast of Ukraine, the second largest city in the country, there's been widespread shelling and artillery against civilian targets. So the Russian side has really stepped up the brutality, and this looks like a new phase of the war.
Brett, I don't know how long you've been in country for. I just wonder if you can offer us a perspective about something that's often not reflected in a lot of coverage of conflicts, which is that oftentimes large parts of the country actually go on, not totally as normal, but in a way that would surprise people who are just seeing pictures from Kiev of missile strikes and tanks being destroyed.
Right, that's a great point. I've been here for more than a month on this assignment, so when we arrived, of course, there was the Russian military buildup on the borders, and few people thought that it would have it. You're right. There are some parts of the country where people are going to restaurants and there are things in the shelves at the stores. But I will say that there is a widespread panic about what's going on and what is to come, and there are people all over preparing Molotov cocktails and bracing themselves for what's to come. They're setting up block points, checkpoints all over the country, arming themselves. I was just at a cafe here in Lviv, and I saw a gentleman walk in with a backpack with an AK-74 foldable model stuck in, the muzzle sticking out of the bag. So regular folks are really taking to the idea that this could be a nationwide effort and a long war.
Brett Forrest, appreciate your analysis. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, and stay safe. Thanks very much indeed. Annabelle Deb
Thank you.
is alongside me. Just that point, and I think it's often true with coverage of wars, the focus is entirely, exclusively on the bullets and the bangs and the bombs, and actually the country, large parts of the country, is relatively unaffected by it.
Well, that's absolutely right, or at least relatively unaffected for now. And of course, what coverage there is and what information that we have of the bullets and the artillery and the fighting itself is quite patchwork. It's very difficult to get definite information. There's a real sense, I feel, with Ukraine, we're very much in the fog of war, and we talk about Putin's war stalling, but we just simply don't know what's happening on the ground. We don't know what's just around the corner.
Annabelle, really been good having you here today. We'll get you a more comfortable stool when you next come in, 6 months pregnant and beyond. Thanks very much indeed. Nana Akura is next. Do stay with us.
Hi there, I'm Aidan McGivern. The far north is dry and bright this afternoon, and it will stay dry at first this evening, but gloomy, damp elsewhere. That cloud and rain spreading north across the country because of these weak weather fronts, but they are introducing an awful lot of low cloud, hill fog, outbreaks of light rain and drizzle. And that weather reaches the north of Scotland through the evening, just about avoiding the Northern Isles until after midnight. So it's a gloomy night for most. Those outbreaks of rain and drizzle continuing, becoming more persistent for western parts of the country during the early hours. Perhaps some clear spells in the far southeast and later for Northern Ireland as well. But in between, with the extensive cloud and rain, temperatures staying up between 7 and 9 Celsius. And so it is another dull and damp start to the day for many, especially western Scotland, northwest England, Wales and the southwest. This is a slow-moving area of cloud and rain, and it will be brighter either side of it. So for parts of eastern England, for Northern Ireland, western Scotland, some sunshine coming through. Mild in the southeast, 13 Celsius for London, 8 to 10 where it's raining in the middle, and something a bit colder there, 8 or 9 for Northern Ireland and western Scotland later. But the front slowly makes its way east on Thursday night into the start of Friday. A damp night to come, I think, for central areas. But either side, some clear spells for East Anglia, Wales, southwest England, Northern Ireland, western Scotland. I think mostly frost-free, however, because of the fairly extensive cloud cover. Perhaps a touch of frost in the west first thing if we see clear enough skies overnight. A few showers, though, following for Northern Ireland, western Scotland, Wales and the southwest. The cloudy and damp zone pushes into eastern parts of the country through much of Friday. Then it peters out through the weekend, so most places turning drier and brighter.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m.